Like, we flew to Australia in the summer, myself, my husband, the kids, and the children.
Thank you.
We flew United. United is probably the last
You
airline.
did fly United? You didn't go on separate planes?
We flew United Airlines. United Airlines.
Do you hear what I mean about listening?
Yeah.
We understand, right?
Yeah.
Most of the time. Okay?
Actually,
United Airlines is probably the last airline
Thank you for saying that thing.
left on this world that does not have individual screens in front of you. There is a big screen in the middle of the aisle and everyone watches the same movie, which is quite uncomfortable because you have to crane your head and you can't really hear. But anyway, we boarded the plane and we settled ourselves in, and my husband, children, myself, and I'm watching the screen, and on this public screen that's being shared with the whole airplane, there is a scene of two gangsters chasing a third gangster and then shooting a third gangster in the head. Obviously a lot of blood, a lot of gore, a lot of violence, a lot of drama. I started freaking out. I'm covering the kids. I was saying, don't look, don't look, don't look. Obviously, as it always happens when you're trying to get somebody's attention away, they didn't even notice it until I started pointing it out. So they're saying, oh, what should we look at, Mummy? Where should we look? Sounds funny, but I think the fact that such violent scenes were being shown for public consumption for children of all ages was not funny at all. That's why I'm here tonight to argue that the prevalence of violence in the media is beyond any acceptable level, that it only leads to negative outcomes, and that it must be eliminated. I will show you how prevalent it is. I will give you good arguments why it is so has such a negative impact. I will mention the arguments that others bring of why it's not so unacceptable, because believe it or not, there are some people who think it's actually okay, and explain to you why they're wrong. First, let's talk about how prevalent it is. This pie chart is TV programs being shown on a regular basis in America. The violet, believe it or not, is the programs that do contain violence. In other words, the majority of TV programs do contain some violence. Here we have popular video games. A good percentage, it's actually 21%, feature violence specifically against women, which is in itself a problem overall, even more specific than violence in general. To throw some more statistics at you, there you see that 61% show some violence, but even more troublesome and more worrying is the fact that 44 of these violent interactions, 44% of them, involve perpetrators who show some attractiveness, something that would make children think, I'd like to be like that. 75% of these violent scenes show absolutely no punishment for the violence or no condemnation. In other words, the violence is being portrayed and the perpetrators are being thrown in jail. The violence is being portrayed, the perpetrators are either getting away with it or being shown as heroes or being shown as having street credibility. Now, why is it so worrying that these video games and these TV programs show so much violence? Well, children are exposed to these more than ever before. The statistics that are given in the most recent report by the Surgeon General, the Surgeon General did do a report just on violence in the media and children in 2000, almost 10 years ago, but still fairly recently, showed that the average American child would spend 6.5 hours a day with video, TV, internet. That's 6.5 hours out of a 24-hour day, of which 61% is showing violent scenes. That's a lot of violence to be watching. Why is this a problem? By watching violence on TV, children are much more likely to behave aggressively or harmfully towards others. It's not enough to say, do what I say, not do what I do. We know that children will do what you do. If they are watching violence, they will act violently. There have been many research studies done. Again, this is the Surgeon General brings these up. Some were done on the immediate case. In other words, show violence to children, record their thoughts and actions immediately after. All the research showed spikes. Children watch violence, they started having more aggressive thoughts, more aggressive behavior, more violent actions. That's one type of study. Another type of study, and the American Academy of Pediatrics is very concerned about this one, are longitudinal studies, studies done over a long amount of time, showing how if you're exposed to violent TV, violent movies, as a youngster, as an adult, you're a more aggressive adult. For example, there was one study that was begun in the 1960s. It took a sample of 875 youths. In other words, a big enough sample to show some real results. It showed that watching this media violence at a young age, 30 years later, we had a large percentage of aggressive, violent adults. Take a look at this chart here. The red, big red, little red. What's this showing? These are showing women who committed violent acts. Anything from stabbing to punching to violent robbery.
Women?
Women, specifically women. Percentage of women committing acts of violence. We had two groups. A group of women who had been exposed to violent media as youngsters, a group of women who had not. Out of the group who hadn't, the group who had not been exposed to violence, 7% of them ended up at some point in adulthood committing a violent act. By contrast, those who had been exposed to media violence, by the time they were adults, 14% had done some violent act. That's a big difference. That's almost double. That is double. So it's actually, 4% to 17. Let me correct my figures. 4% to 17%. That's almost 5 times the amount. What's another problem that we have? Sometimes when children watch violence, it's not so much that they become violent themselves. It's that they, instead of reacting outwardly, they react inwardly. See, children, they are not able to differentiate between reality and fantasy. The American Academy of Pediatrics has proved this many times, that children do not have this ability to say, this is real, this is not. When they see violence on TV, on videos, they think this is what the world is like. The world is a scary, rough, mean place where I am very likely to come across somebody with a gun or somebody with brass knuckles or somebody who wants to hurt me. This is called mean world syndrome. Kids who live most of their life, or at least their childhood, in fear. How can we do that to our children? How can we raise a generation of children who are spending their days in fear? So us it seems pretty clear cut, but like I said, there are some who say not necessarily.
Even that voice outside pays because they want to hear you. Just wait a moment. You might gesture towards the noise. Wait a moment. If it doesn't go away, and it did now. If it doesn't go away, then you raise your voice. Otherwise, you just wait till it passes.
Now, what are the counter arguments that people bring to this? There are some experts, or non-experts, who say that, yes, there are many research studies that show a connection between watching media violence and later violent behavior, but then they say there are plenty of studies that don't show any relation. You can prove it any way you like. Use which studies you don't, which studies show relation, which studies don't. Well, yes, they're true that some studies do not show any relation between watching violence and acting violently. But let's look at the number. Here we have 18 studies in which no relationship is shown. Here we have 3,500. So which studies do you want to go according to? Then we have those who say, well,
You
yes.
did a wonderful thing in that rhetorical question. You could have given it more time. Which do you want to go according to? Look at everybody and then you do. In other words, give them a chance to react. It's enough.
Then we have those who say, well, yes, people who watch violent media become violent adults.